If I wanted to create a final output for this rain and splash scene, I'd look at breaking it up into render passes. I'll do so by switching over to the render toolset and begin by creating a brand new render pass. I'll open an Explorer to help me out and switch the scope of the scene to passes. I have a default pass to begin with, and I'll start by building a brand new empty pass. I'm going to call this pass the matte pass. And this pass is going to be the rain against black, essentially. I'm going to give the rain a constant white color and color everything else in the scene black, so it'll occlude the rain. When the rain goes behind an object, it will get knocked out. Easiest way to do that is to gather my point cloud and put it into its own partition. At the moment, it's sitting in a partition with all of the other elements. I'll partition it off, and I'll call this the rain splash partition. I'll give everything else in the scene a constant black color. So right away we give ourselves a really stark backdrop to view our particles against. If we have a look at the alpha, you can see we have a really nice cutout of our particle system. The problem here is that we're also getting the alpha of the buildings. We don't want the alpha of the buildings, we just want to knock out the particles. We just want to isolate the particles themselves. So when it comes to the partition that contains the shader giving the materials a black color, giving the objects in the scene a black color, I'm going to also remove their alpha from the render. So now we're dealing with a pure rain matte pass. So I again draw my render region. So there's our alpha. And I can switch back to RGB mode. Okay, so that's the first part. I'm going to create a brand new pass, another empty pass. And for this pass here, I'm going to call this one my BG pass. And this pass is going to be composed of all the rest of the scene objects. So open up the Explorer on the BG pass, isolate the point cloud, partition it off as the rain partition. And in this case, we would just want to hide it. So everything else in the scene will get rendered. If I switch back to the matte pass for a moment, I want to give the rain a constant white shader. So I'll select the point cloud. Again, if I move back into passes mode and I'm actually working on the matte pass, I want to switch to the pass. I don't want to actually give the point cloud itself the shader. I want to give the partition holding the point cloud the shader. So the point cloud already has its own shader, and while it's sitting in a partition, it will have another kind of shader. So with the with the partition selected, I'll apply a constant shader to the partition as well. Okay. I'm going to render off between these two passes and then composite them in post. I'm going to delete the default partition, or the default pass, because I don't really need that, and set up a start and end frame for these particles. So if I jump back into the ice tree one more time, I'll set the number of particles in this scene to something pretty high. So we can have a torrential kind of rain. Let me just have a look at my lighting quickly. I'll make sure I'm on the BG pass so I can see everything. And make sure that my BG pass has an alpha. Yeah, it's got a nice cutout, so I can drop an image into the background at any time. The only thing I'm missing here is a shadow. I might want to just add that in quickly. If I look under my set lighting, I should have my key light, and it just happens to be hidden. I want to change the lighting just a little bit. So my key light, I'm going to take down the moodiness of the lighting itself. So I'm going to have fairly dark shadows, but the overall intensity and the tone is going to be much more somber and gray. And I'm going to bring in the fill light. It's got a fairly high intensity. I don't want it to be that intense either. If my key light has a proportion of 0.2, maybe even take it to 0.4, I'm going to take my fill light down to about 0.23. But really making this a lot more gray. The point light I'm actually using for the illumination of the rain, so I could actually set this point light, so I'll actually call this the rain light. I could actually set this light to only affect the rain particles. If I was to hide it, you'll notice that it has a very large impact on the set. So if I move back into my Explorer, on the background pass, I want to make sure that the rain light is in its own partition, and I'll hide it. Actually, I don't even necessarily need to hide it. I just need to turn it down while it's in this partition, because it looks like it is having an interesting effect. So on the partition, I'll add an override property and override the light's intensity while it sits in this particular pass. So under the light shader, we'll ramp into the intensity as a parameter connection, and I'll lower the intensity on that light to about 40% for this pass, 37%. Okay, that's working okay. If I switch to the rain pass, everything looks pretty good. So I'm going to go with this as my render. I'm going to increase the final amount of rain to something quite high, in this case like 5,000 particles per second, and we'll let this scene render up, and we'll come back and have a look at it. So I hope you've enjoyed these tutorials so far. The last bit is going to involve some compositing. So that's it for the ice section of the tutorials. I hope you understood a little bit more about state machines and the idea of using conditions to generate different behaviors for different states. And we'll carry a lot of these concepts through into the next series of tutorials. So we'll render for now. I'll save this as my final rain scene. And once the render's done, we'll come in and build one of our composite trees for it and export as a final flipbook. So I'll set up the pass options. In this case, I might actually set this as the first frame of my simulation. So if I grab the point cloud and I move on over into ice, I can set this as my initial state. So if I move back to frame 1, I don't actually have to ramp up. The effect is just ready to go. So for the snow, or for the rain itself, the scene options, I'm going to render from frame 1 to frame, let's say 250. All of our settings look good here. I'm actually going to change the name of the render pass. I'm just going to call it my rain pass. I'll render in the pick format. That looks good. And when I switch to my BG pass, scene options there, 1 to 250, 720 by 540. I don't really need 250 frames of this because it's just going to be a held frame. So I'll render a single frame to make this a lot easier. I don't actually have a sky yet, so I'm going to layer a sky in after the fact. I'm just going to try and match up a tone, perhaps even use physical sky as a separate render pass. So we'll be working back and forth between the compositor and XSI at this stage. So now I'll do one more thing. I'll actually look at the render manager and make sure that the mental ray options for the BG pass, I'm going to make these local render pass. So I can set the anti-aliasing, or the aliasing, at high quality. So we've actually got them at high quality there. And I believe that also means that on the rain pass, the mental ray settings are also fairly high as well. So I can actually go with both of them. So I'll render off the current pass, and we get our first frame of the BG. I just want to make sure that the first frame of the rain goes according to plan, because there are a lot more particles than we dealt with in the last few tests. That was rendering the current pass. Well, let's actually just render the rain pass. Okay, this has to do with our scene options. So I'm in the rain pass. I'm going to go into, there we go. It's the frame range. 1 to frame 250. And for the BG pass, scene options, again, I just want to, I go into my pass options, the pass frames, I'm going to use my own frame range here. For this BG pass, just a single frame. So let me switch over to the rain pass one more time and make sure that everything is working according to plan. There's a lot more particles. Okay, there we go. We can actually see the raindrops now. So I know this is going to work, so I'll sign back in when the renders are done. So I'll go render all passes, and away we go.